So I just want to introduce Monica. She graduated in pharmacy at the University of Milano in 1992. And she has been a professor of pharmacology at the University of Milano since 1999. In 1993, she completed a PhD program in molecular biology at the University of Utrecht. Her primary research interest related to brain and synaptic plasticity was both in physiological and pathological conditions, with the primary aim to apply her basic findings to the cure of neurodegenerative disorders, particularly Alzheimer's disease. Her discoveries enriched our understanding of glutamatergic synapse in physiology and pathology, increasing our knowledge and plasticity and memory, and leading the new tools for neuroprotection. This is so important. She is author of more than 200 scientific publications on peer-reviewed journals. A prominent trait of Monica De Luca's career is her deep and exigent involvement in sharing ideas over borders and establishing collaborative multi-stakeholder networks, merging scientists, clinicians, and patient organizations. And so this EBC is the perfect place for Monica. She has served as a member of council of several national and international scientific organizations, and at present she is the president of EBC. Thank you, Monica, and please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. First of all, your kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here today and to have really the opportunity to share with this important meeting component some information about a project that is very close to my heart, which is EBRA, the European Brain Research Area project. This is a project that has been funded by the European Commission, and this is the main theme of my presentation today. The project, as Atici already alluded to, is led by the European Brain Council, and I have the honor for a few more months to lead this important organization. So for those who are not familiar with the EBC, I would like really to spend 1 minute to show what it's all about and what we are doing inside European Brain Council. The European Brain Council has been funded already 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And originally we had this idea to put together and to merge at the same table all the major stakeholders that in Europe have an interest in the brain. So we are encompassing scientific societies, clinicians, clinical societies, private sector partners, member state representative, very importantly, and most important above all, patients' organization. This is for us absolutely a unique table in which we can share ideas and foster advocacy and try to give our area of interest, which is brain research, the attention that requires and deserve from the policymaker. So this is a very important board, as I said, and the general idea is to promote brain research and brain health, as I was alluding to, in order to improve the prevention, the diagnosis, the therapy, and the care, and to improve the quality of life for those citizens which are living with the brain disorders in Europe. And we will come back in a minute on this particular challenge. And of course, inside the EBC, we detected some major action areas. We decided that one of the primary areas is to foster the cooperation within our member organization to promote the dialogue between scientists, clinicians, patients, industry, and the society as a whole, to raise awareness and promoting the education on the brain, disseminating information about brain research and brain diseases in Europe. And of course, to represent a sort of a unified and unique interlocutor for our policymaker to interact with the European Commission, with the European Parliament, and other relevant international institutions. As I alluded to you before, immediately we recognized the importance of brain research to respond to a major challenge which is out there. And in my eyes, this major challenge, which is represented by brain disorders, is really an urgent challenge for all European member states, for Europe as a whole, and really represent a ticking bomb for our economy. In fact, we know, and EBC has been maybe producing some seminal study on this respect. We know that 179 million European citizens are experiencing in their life a brain disorder, neurological or mental alike. And this means that 1 out of 3 European citizens are set to live with their lifespan. So it's incredible number. It's really worrisome. The treatment account for 35% of European total disease burden. The cost of brain disorders is being calculated yearly of about 800 billion euros. And we now know also, because we have been seconded by WHO, that brain disorders, neurological and psychiatric diseases altogether, represent the biggest numbers of years lost due to disability at European level. And of course, this represents also an important burden worldwide. This is high. We need to change this number. We need to change through intensified research to try to merge together at the same table for discussion all the major funding agencies at European level, but also confronting worldwide. And this is exactly what EBRA is doing, because EBRA, as I alluded to you before, is a European project that is funded in Horizon 2020. And that is generated through a consortium that is very important. It's led by European Brain Council that is representing at large the society, the scientific society, the clinical society, but has as a partner JPND, Aranet Neuron, Human Brain Project, so all the largest initiatives that in Europe are indeed funding brain research. So, and we decided to put together these important elements inside the consortium because we wanted conceptually to try to tackle 3 major aspects. First of all, we were absolutely conscious in somehow of the duplication also the funding efforts that may occur in Europe. So we decided that we would like to tackle the fragmentation that is existing in Europe in our funding scheme. We wanted to create connections, better connections. We wanted to identify possible gaps in funding, and above all, at a very strategic point, we wanted to define shared priorities for brain research across Europe and to confront ourselves with what is occurring outside Europe at international and global level when many other large brain initiatives are developing. So basically, EBRA is oriented in 2 different levels and decided to move to different plans. A plan that maybe is more strategic, because we decided that we want really to foster the alignment and to achieve a better coordination and coordinate research strategies across the different European brain initiatives. And we move also, and we will have a very important message today from Michele Simonato that will follow. We want also to move it a little bit more at operational level to support research communities in specific brain research area and to leverage the network capacity of these research communities. The project is highly ambitious, as you can understand. It's also very important for all the European neuroscience community. And we decided to articulate in different work packages. Of course, the most important that I would like to share with you are the central work package. The first one is a mapping landscape that I would like to report to you. Precise mapping of the resources that have been put into neuroscience in the last decade or so. The shared European brain research agenda, as I already alluded to you before. And of course, this operational level in which we decided to target some specific research area and to generate active clusters of researchers of the community to leverage the network capacity and working together. Let's start from the landscape analysis. This was a very ambitious goal that has been never done before, and we decided to put together all the funding of the 7 framework program of Horizon 2020, whole version of ERA-net neuron, joint programming, JP&D, neurodegenerative diseases, and the Human Brain Project. And all these data has been put together in a very complex, let's say, algorithm, and also with a second-hand manual validation. So we analyzed all the possible projects that within this large program in neuroscience funded research. And we end up with almost 4,000 projects that in Europe has been addressing neuroscience. And we decided to analyze in terms of content, in terms of geographical distribution, in terms of topic that they addressed. It's quite very interesting because we also had a very interesting aspect on gender issue that has been also reported and very soon will be disclosed. So we had access to the large database of the European Commission, and we are particularly grateful to the European Commission because they have been willing to collaborate with us and to allow us to navigate the large database that they have for the 7 framework program and Horizon 2020, database of neuron, database of GPND, and database of the Human Brain Project. As I alluded to you before, out of this large bulk of projects that were addressing neuroscience research, you can then interrogate these data sets and this database in many different ways. This is an example how much we dedicated effort in specific topics, but there are many ways. This mapping report has been delivered to the Commission, and it will be very soon made public to the whole community, so that I really hope that very soon we can share with you all possible data and all possible ways in which we could interrogate this database. The second important aspect, as I alluded to you before, is the shared European brain research agenda that respond to the questions that I posed at the beginning. Shall we identify shared priorities? And avoiding fragmentation and duplication of funding in the different area of research and in the different measures that actually are funding brain research in Europe. And of course, the framework should guide the future brain research investment, should promote basic, translational, and clinical brain research, enable the innovation as much as we can, improve the lives of those citizens that are living with the brain disorders, and address this economic challenge that is posed by brain disorders in Europe that I already alluded to you is really a ticking bomb for our economy. So we have a very precise methodology because we started from existing brain research agendas. And we knew, and they are public, that both JPND, ERA-net neuron, HPP, but also EBC, with a large constituency of EBC, had some priority lines. So we decided, first of all, to start from those and identify which are the shared priorities among these pre-existing agendas and which are the eventual gap that we could identify. And we sent this particular analysis, that was a very careful analysis, to experts that has been indicated by the scientific societies, so by the community at large in Europe. And we run different surveys and different set of surveys among these experts. We come out with a large workshop in which we verbally discuss this important aspect, and we are now in the process of highlighting which are the real priorities that are emerging from this complex exercise. So from one side, we have this mapping exercise that is mapping the landscape of funds given to brain research in a set of 15 years or so, because we are spanning now 2 framework programs. And on the other side, we are now identifying new priorities or evolving priorities for future investment. Of course, we will be ready pretty soon. This deliverable is going to be delivered in April next year. So we will have an open consultation with all the stakeholders, so with you as expert and as our, let's say, community, to react to this proposed shared research agenda. And then, of course, there is an important step in which we would like to promote this agenda at a global level. And for this, we'll foster the dialogue to other global brain initiative. And we already started this important process because we've been confronted with the US Brain Initiative, with the Japanese Brain Initiative, Korean, with the International Brain Initiative, and with many other different partners all over the world. And I'm very proud to say that we have been able to share ideas also last week during the first European Brain Summit, and with a very important session that has been run by STOA, which is the scientific and technological group of the committee of the European Parliament that they host us. And it was very nice to confront ourselves at European level with all international brain initiatives around the world. A very important aspect to me that is maybe not strategic as the shared research agenda, but is extremely important in terms of leverage of specific research community is the formation of clusters. In fact, one of the main goals of EBRA was to call for clusters. So to identify cluster for us is identifying a research community that may profit for a better coordination, to expand their scientific community, to engage with other relevant stakeholders, to be consensus on different topics of their interest, priorities, ethics, sharing the data, and to connect with the research infrastructure, and overall to increase their own visibility in the European scenario and in the international scenario. We run several calls for application of clusters, and I have to say that I've been extremely proud to say that we had excellent application, huge number of those, much more that we could handle and that we could support, unfortunately. So we have now 6 EBRA clusters running, but we are keeping contact with everybody because I really believe that this was a great effort from the whole community, and it's so important to understand the role and the effort of everybody. So not only those who are represented here, and we will hear from their voice very soon in a minute, their success and the reason why they decided to approach EBRA and to join EBRA, but it will be also important to share with everybody who applied. And this, for me, is an incredible, powerful tool for our community. So the clusters are extremely active. They are running consensus meeting. They are identifying their own priorities, the topic that they would like to share. They are discussing important aspects like data sharing, like in interaction with the private sector, like neuroethical aspects. And of course, there is another important aspect that I should not forget before closing my description of EBRA, and this is the patient engagement. We believe, and this is intrinsic to all EBC status, that a dialogue very early in the research project and in the research design process with patients organization is extremely important, is informative, and is absolutely fundamental for us to direct our own ideas. So the patient's involvement strategy is fully embedded in EBRA and fully implemented also in EBRA activities. They are the large European patients organization are embedded in the governance. They are embedded in the strategic level, because even in the shared European brain research agenda methodology that I described to you, they have been engaged, they send their own expert, they are involved in the clusters, and of course, they are fundamental for the dissemination of the results of our project. So with this, I really thank you for your attention, and it was really a privilege for me to share these ideas on EBRA. I really think that EBRA represent a step forward in the coordination of all the efforts that has been put before, and working together is really the way to be confronted with the challenge that are posed by brain, by understanding the brain as a whole and understanding the disease of the brain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Monica, for this excellent talk. Thank you so much. Monica has to leave, and Elka de Vita will answer the questions in the end of the session. Elka is the head of the project development in EBC. And while saying thank you to Monica, we hope to see you at our in-person meeting.
Thank you very much. It was a privilege. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Atici. Thank you.
Neuroscience is from the University of Ferrara, Department of Neuroscience and Rehabilitation. He received his MD degree at the University of Ferrara in 1983 and specialized in clinical toxicology at the University of Florence in 1987. He subsequently worked for more than 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Pharmacology of the University of Alabama at Birmingham, USA, and as doctoral fellow and research assistant at the Duke University Medical Center in US. He's currently full professor of pharmacology and toxicology at the University of Ferrara, director of program of clinical pharmacology of the St. Anna Hospital of Ferrara, and group leader in gene therapy for neurological diseases at the San Raffaele Hospital of Milan, Italy. Among other appointments, he has been director of the Center of Neuroscience at the University of Ferrara, vice president of the Italian National Institute for Neuroscience, chair of the Joint Translational Task Force of the International League Against Epilepsy of the American Epilepsy Society, coordinator of a U.S. National Institutes of Health working group for the development of biomarkers for epilepsy. So Michele authored about 150 papers in peer-reviewed international journals. is reviewers for about 30 grant agencies and 50 journals, and editor of 4. His main research interests are on the development of gene and cell therapy approaches for the treatment of focal epilepsies. What I can think of is how you could manage all these achievements. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you. And thank you for...
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. Okay, sorry for the inconvenience. I'll briefly describe you the case of EPICLUSTER. That is one of the clusters that was mentioned by Monica De Luca just a few minutes ago, that is supported by EBRA. I don't think there is any need that I emphasize some key points about epilepsy. You all know that it is a very common disease, that it is costly for the society, not only for the individuals, that we lack fully satisfactory treatments, and that epilepsy is not only seizures, but there are comorbidities, stigma, access to therapy issues, sudden unexpected death by epilepsy. For all these reasons, the World Health Organization signed a resolution a few years ago urging member states to improve investments in epilepsy research. And all these, of course, highlights the need for transdisciplinary coordinated actions. And for that reason, a few years ago, actually the story started even earlier than 2018. It started at the end of 2014, when I decided as coordinator of a European project called the EPICLUSTER, to reach out for other epilepsy-centered projects. And I organized a meeting including coordinators and representatives of these other projects, as well as patients representative and patients organization. And based on that model, a few years later, so it's now 2018, together with other coordinators of big European projects centered on epilepsy, we organized a second EPI-Exchange that we called EPI-Exchange 2018, that gathered together 170 investigators for 18 European countries and 5 non-European countries, as well as stakeholders, representative of the industry, patients organization, and so forth. And the idea was to identify some priorities for the future of research in epilepsy. And of course, we identify some scientific and clinical challenges, but also we identified the need for a better coordination of the efforts, both in terms of research and infrastructure. And at the end of the meeting, we also came out with a sort of exercise. It was the opening at that time of Horizon Europe, and it was this idea of missions, research missions. We developed a mission for epilepsy that was based to the identification of research and innovation projects that through cross-sectoral actions could lead to some quite specific goals well defined in terms of timing. So that was where we were in 2019, at the beginning of 2019, when EBRA announced the call that Monica described to you. That was essentially based on the idea of facilitating, enhancing networking and coordination efforts in different areas and promote collaboration among research networks. And we decided to apply, and that was the birth of EPICLUSTER, a collaborative framework for the coordinated actions of epilepsy research in Europe. The leadership was essentially based on the 7 coordinators of European projects that participated in EP Exchange, and other key representatives of the FENS, the Federation of the European Neuroscience Association, and as well as the International League Against Epilepsy and the International Bureau for Epilepsy. So essentially, coordinators of European research projects and epilepsy-related organizations. But that was the initial nucleus. Then we immediately started searching out for synergies with other European funded projects in other areas, like European Science Foundation or the training networks, or ERANET or a Human Brain Project, as well as non-European research groups like the Centers Without Walls in the US. So in order to create a community that would be reinforced with the help of EBRA. And our vision is that further research and innovation efforts by this community will be essential to reach tangible goals for people with epilepsy. And the objectives can be synthesized in 4 essential words. The first one is advancing the current knowledge, the collaboration, and the research in core topics. The second is sharing. So enhance the sharing of resources, develop a preclinical trial network, enhance clinical trial structures, and develop and favor research exchange mechanisms. The third keyword is engagement, and actually Monica also emphasized this. The engagement of people with epilepsy is absolutely key, and I will show you what we have done also in that direction. And last but not least, of course, funding. Epilepsy research is overall underfunded. In that, Monica just briefly showed the results of their survey on the funding of neuroscience in Europe, and you may have noticed that epilepsy is far from the top, and especially considering how common the disease is, this is of course a negative element. Ambition is to remove fragmentation and to create a pan-European cutting-edge epilepsy research system that will favor global funding initiatives. As Monica said, the EBRA does not provide direct funding for research, but it's just a matter of creating networks, and that was perfectly in line with the basic idea of EPICLUSTER. So what we had was funding for organizing consensus meetings, or exchange of information meetings, and meetings to plan for the future. Unfortunately, the EPICLUSTER was funded at the end of 2019. And so we ended up perfectly in time for the pandemic, and all our meetings, of course, so far at least, have been run remotely. The first meeting was in June 2020. This was a consensus meeting, and the goal was simply to gather together the leadership with representatives of epilepsy alliances, society, and industry, to generate a consensus to work together. We call it this EP area of working together in Europe. This was a one day meeting with 20 participants, and the deliverable was a consensus document that was published and hosted by EBRA. Then the second meeting was in December 2020. We called it EPI Exchange 2 because it was a two-day meeting. The first day, the focus was to review progress and future directions in key research areas, to consolidate ongoing cooperation. And that was 110 participants. And the second day was I jumped up. And the third meeting was ran just a few days ago, just a couple of weeks ago, and this was on patient involvement in epilepsy research. It was exclusively focused on the patient and public involvement. It was organized in collaboration with the International Bureau for Epilepsy, and in particular with the new president of the IBE, that is Francesca Sofia. And the goal was to showcase ways and practices for bringing people with epilepsy and researchers to work together on a common ground. And this was a one-day meeting with about 100 participants, and we are now preparing a report of this meeting. The last meeting of EPICLUSTER will be a sort of wrap-up meeting. We plan it for spring 2022, and the goal will be to review the network achievements and establish priority for the future, and have a white final paper with a recommendation roadmap for the future. That is the goal here will be to establish this network, establish connections also with funding agencies, as well as with the patients' organization, to foster epilepsy research in the future. Thank you for your attention, and sorry again for the initial problem.
Thank you so much, Michele. So we go to the questions and answers session. Please, if you have any questions, write on the Q&A function, and both for Elka and for Michele.
If I may,
please
come in and just thank Michele, and before her, Monica, for explaining a little bit about what these things are. We've been working with you for some time, but I know many of our members won't understand. Could I ask, one reason that you sit in Brussels is you've told us very eloquently how you managed to improve the spending and the amount of cake that goes to various parts of neuroscience funding within Europe and the way you wish to collaborate in order to improve the efficiency, which is admirable. Is there any way that we can improve the size of the cake? In other words, sitting in Brussels, what can be done to increase funding for research into neurological impairments?
I can have a first answer to that. I think it's indeed very important what you say, and indeed with the mapping report we've showed, let's say, what has been done. It was actually, let's say, a mapping report based on projects from 2008 and 2019. And with the SEBRA, of course, we want to go now a step further and really talk about research priorities. And the idea to spread that not only globally is to also work closely with the member states, actually. So to not only say, look, we have this agenda and we spread it, of course, via all our members and via the large community, but to also work with, for example, the national brain councils we have at EBC to make sure this, of course, has also been taken up at the national level, because we have to work with the member states. And I think that's something that we cannot, let's say, forget. But maybe, Michele, you want to add something to that? Maybe you have some particular experience from your own, let's say, field.
There is something that we happened to discuss in Brussels when we had an introductory meeting, and in fact that was my last meeting in person before the pandemic, because I think it was January 2020, right? And we at that time there was also a comparison between how neuroscience was funded in Framework 7 and Horizon 2020. And we had some discussion about the observation that neuroscience was better funded in Framework 7 than in Horizon 2020. And one of the possible explanations was that in Horizon 2020 there was an emphasis on the so-called horizontal kind of calls, meaning, for example, calls on personalized medicine or advanced therapies like gene therapy, cell therapy, and so forth, in which projects on neuroscience were competing against the projects in other fields that were inevitably more advanced toward clinical application than the neuroscience. And for that reason, it became very difficult for neuroscience projects to be winners. And so I don't know if that discussion had any impact on Horizon Europe. My impression is that the first calls are slightly different, and there may be a change in the future. But I mean, this was one of the problems that we identified.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Let's hope this will change in the future. And particularly this mapping, it was really important. And I must admit that I am surprised with the epilepsy. I have always been thinking that it was one of the most funded fields, actually. But in the end, it is not a matter of epilepsy or dementia, but it's a matter of neuroscience. We increase the funding in general in neuroscience, of course. So, yeah, with your efforts, we hope it will change in the future. I have a question for Elka. Are there plans for more clusters?
Well, within, let's say, the current project, unfortunately not, because of course we had a restricted, we received restricted budget to support the clusters. So we had 3 calls that ended up in these 6 clusters that were presented. But we will definitely look into, let's say, future ways to help support the clusters. So we're now actually coming to the last year of EBRA. So we asked for an extension because obviously with the whole pandemic, many of the cluster activities needed to be done virtually. And of course, we know that for networking, it helps to be there in person. So we'll have now the last year of EBRA, and within that last year, of course, we still have a lot of plans, a lot of activities that we want to organize. And as Monica mentioned, what we'll do is we'll organize an activity for all clusters, but maybe also for the ones that applied but weren't able to let's say, to receive the funding because we only had so much to really work on sustainability and to really discuss ways to make sure that the clusters can sustain after, let's say, the EBRA project is finished, which will be probably so within a year, end of October 2022. So within the project, no, but obviously part of the EBRA project aim is, of course, to support and to help think about ways to sustain the cluster so they can obviously continue after after the EBRA project.
Thank you so much. Are there further questions? I cannot see any on the question and answer. Yeah, one of the aims of the EBRA project was data sharing. It can be challenging because of the data protection rules. I just want to ask how it is going. Has there been focus on this, or will there be further work in the future?
Yeah, so I am trying to remember when we held that workshop, but we had a couple of months ago a workshop that was co-organized with HBP or eBrains, actually was one of the partners of EBRA on data sharing. And then obviously we also invited Neuron to talk about their experience in data sharing. And yeah, we had a lot of panels discussion on this matter, and there were some specific use cases. I think one of them was also in the epilepsy field. So that's one thing we've done so far. And actually now we're discussing as well with eBrains how to continue this discussion, because obviously all clusters were invited to that workshop, and then some have very specific requests, but overall it was already very insightful to have a discussion with all clusters, because of course there's some common challenges, let's say all clusters shared, and obviously now we need to move ahead with these challenges, but obviously they're also very specific challenge to certain fields, and that's something we're now going to follow up in the last year.
Could I ask, in funding, there's often a slight tension between basic science and clinical science, or applied science, or applied research. Has this been apparent during the evolution of your own projects or within Europe? So for instance, within clinical neurophysiology, we have a lot of people who are very clinically orientated, but we also have more academic neuroscientists who coexist, and their research interests will be very different. And I wondered if that had been a potential problem at all.
Well, I can tell you in the field of epilepsy, yes, there is a problem like that, but at the same time, I have to say in the frame of EPICLUSTER, clinicians, clinical research and basic research are going together quite well. I mean, there are some very clinically oriented projects and investigators that are discussing openly with more basic science-oriented people, and I think you raise a very fundamental issue, because getting together these two elements, two parts, is really key if we want to progress. I'm absolutely convinced that basic science, without basic science, there could be no real innovation, and at the same time, needless to say, without clinical science, there would be no impact of innovation in the real life of patients.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to say that this is particular a very specific and important topic, for example, in the SEBRA discussions we had with the experts, really this multidisciplinary approach, and to really close the gap, let's say, if there's a gap between the basic ones and the more applied ones, that we all need to indeed work together, and we have to, yeah, we cannot do it in the silos, let's say.
If I can add some personal impression, is that especially after the last meeting that we had in EPICLUSTER that I mentioned, the one on patients' involvement, my personal impression is that patients can be the perfect glue to bring together these two parts, souls, and make them work.
So thank you so much. So I think we are even a bit over our time. It has been so exciting. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for coming
So
and
much.
explaining it all to us. Yep.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.